Hello everyone. Today we are going to go over something a little bit different. So a previous student of mine, Dania, was able to send me a concept that he was working on and was struggling with addressing the sleeves and kind of nailing this type of specific sleeve. So I believe this concept is generated by AI, but if you guys know the artist and who to credit, please let me know. When I was searching this image, it was really hard to find a name, so let me know. This is the sleeve in question, so we are definitely going to go over some tips and tricks of how to address a sleeve like this, and hopefully you guys will be able to tackle those guys out in the wild. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm just going to shimmy our patterns over. Not too important, but I just want to, I don't know, work where the shadow is. And so before I just dive into it, what I try to do beforehand is identify the character points that I know define a certain piece of clothing. So what that means is I want to see what makes this sleeve this specific sleeve. So there's going to be a few parts, right? There is definitely this part right here where it's giving us that voluminous kind of padded shoulder look. On top of that, we have the ruffles that are gathering quite a bit at the top, right? And then it cinches down at this waistband, armband right here. So it kind of feels like it's pulling here and it's cinched here, but it's not necessarily poofing outwards like this guy. It's just kind of going long and then pulling again at the bottom. So for me, I want to break up this part into 2 to 3 pieces. So the top part, the armband, and then the bottom part. So let's go ahead and build this sleeve. So first thing that I want to do is I'm just going to build out a very simple sleeve. Okay, I'm not thinking about, too much. I'm just going to start with a rectangle and see from there. And I'm going to go ahead and add a point to the middle of our pattern. I like to do this so that we can separate our sewing relationships later when we sew the front half and the back half. And it allows me to get a visual of where the apex of our sleeve should be. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this guy out because it looks like in total, if I grab these segment lines, there's going to be a line length here. So it looks like it's 17.5-ish. So let's pull this guy out. Oops. Pull this guy out to about 17.5-ish. And let's see, it looks like 23 in the back. So let's just pull this guy out to around 23. And let's make our shape for our sleeve. And again, I know that sometimes we try to make it as symmetrical as possible, but depending on the model, it's hard to kind of get that symmetrical hill look, if you will. So what I try to do is just my best at making this feel as symmetrical as it can look. All right. We're pretty forgiving. I think we could pull this guy in because I think we have elongated this guy. We want it to be around 17.5 since that's what it's getting sewn onto. Oopsies. Something like that. And then it's 24, so let's pull this guy in as well just to be around 23-ish. All right, and then let's sew it in. So look, I split this guy. I made a little dart so that it just sits a little bit more flush against the body. So I'm gonna use my M and N sewing tool. And we're just gonna click our first half here, press enter, and then our next 2 parts here, and then press enter. And then we're just going to do a regular segment line to here. Voila! Cool. All right, we're gonna grab this guy and we're gonna do superimpose side and have it just, oh. Lately I feel like my results when I do superimpose, it gets a little wonky like that. So if that's the case, we could always bring in our arrangement points here and just grab this guy and snap it to where it needs to go. Right here. right here. Okay, that's totally fine with me. Turn off our arrangement points. And let's just sim this guy. Amazing, cool. So that looks pretty good. Let's make it a little shorter so that it hits the wrist right here. So we're just gonna pull it up until it hits right at the base of that. And then as you saw, I did not have this sewing relationship. What tends to happen is if I close this up and we make that huge move, sometimes it kind of closes off of the arm, so we want to prevent that. So I always try to keep that guy open until everything is kind of in place, and then we'll just sim it closed. Awesome. Cool. So now that we have our sleeve here, I'm going to make a internal line to indicate where our armband is. So it looks like it's going to most likely hit around the chest. So it looks like around here would be a good spot. Of course, you guys will be way more diligent than me and make sure that everything is hitting the right areas. Okay, so now that I have these internal lines for my waist, for my waistband, for my armband, I'm gonna do a cut and sew. So what that'll allow me to do is separate these guys into my top part and my bottom part. And then we have this little piece that's going to live underneath this armband, right? Ideally, we're going to model this guy out inside of Marvelous, or inside of Maya or ZBrush, wherever you guys want. And then you're just going to stack it right on top of this piece of fabric. So what I notice is when it comes to armbands like this, people want to just kind of build it out as if like how you would think of it in real life, where it's just a plain long sheet of fabric, right, getting tied onto and cinched onto in this area. But what tends to happen when you guys do that is that there's just a lot of excess fabric underneath this armband that really fights the sim, and it's asking Marvelous to do way too much. So what I tend to do with armband situations like this, or just any band area where there needs to be that cinching kind of look, is I actually go ahead and grab this guy and cinch it, like pre-cinch it, so that when we inevitably bring in our armband, it just sits nice and neatly right on top of this very clean band. I'm going to actually go ahead and strengthen it, Control H. And what that'll do is just kind of keep its integrity a little bit better. I don't really enjoy, do you see how it's kind of going on an angle like this? I kind of want it to sit a little bit more perpendicular. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deactivate our bottom pattern here. Actually, let's see if we could do this at the top. Okay, and then I'm just going to use my arm band separately without any fabric, and I'm just going to push it to an area that I feel like is sitting pretty good for me. All right. Obviously, you just make sure that your armband is tight enough so that it just sits here and it doesn't slide off. But, it's a small piece of fabric that you can, if it slides off, you can just put it back. No worries. And I did lower the particle distance just now. The reason why for that is because when it comes to small pieces of fabric, it really fights the program sometimes. So what helps with the sim is just making sure that it is, whoa, I don't know why this sewing relationship is kind of crooked, but I'm just updating it so that it reaches the entire length of it. But having a smaller particle distance for smaller pieces of fabric helps with just making sure that there's enough topology in here for it to sim properly. Sometimes if it's too low poly, then it kind of gives you a hard time. Okay, so I think I finessed that enough. Once I like the general position of this armband, I'm going to freeze it. I'm actually going to go ahead and just kind of separate it away so that I don't accidentally unfreeze it. And then we're going to bring in our rest of our sleeve. So now we have this clean armband, right? And the reason why I like simming it separately, I'm just going to actually rotate it a little bit so that it can kind of sit. I would want this band to feel like it's straight. Do you know what I mean? Like perpendicular to our arm, right? If we have it kind of at the slant that it was at, it kind of looks like it's sliding off. So cool. I think that's sitting a lot better. Cool, cool, cool. All right, so we're gonna freeze our bottom here, and we're just gonna focus more on the top area right here. Okay, so again, we're gonna address this top part right here. I'm not worried about any of this stuff happening. We're just worried about this top oomph. Okay, so let's see if I can just go about it intuitively and see if we get that shape, right? Before using any collider help. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, oh, perfect. So ideally I want this guy to be in two parts. So even this sewing relationship, I'm going to kind of bring it up to around this point right here and have it match right there. And then I'm going to sew the rest of this guy into the bottom. And the reason for that is because I want to separate the top half behavior to the bottom half behavior. I don't think we really necessarily need all the ruffling to reach all the way underneath the armpit. I think it's more important that we hit this top area right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a point to the end of our sewing relationship. How I know that it's the end is that the dash is always going to be closer to the start. So what that means is you were sewing from here to here. Okay, so we're going to add another point to the end here. What that allows me to do is separate out these sewing relationships so that if I alter this guy at the top doesn't get moved. Cool. So now, since I have that going for me, I'm going to extend this guy, right? No rhyme or reason. That's kind of an ugly shape, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of delete all of the extra stuff. I know this is not a pretty shape, but just for the initial adjustment, I'm just going to ignore it. And we're going to start offsetting this guy. Cool. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and drop this guy's particle distance down to 15. Sometimes when, again, it's low poly, it doesn't allow me to really see what's going on. So for me, it was really hard to see if this is giving an offset. It should by now. But since it's low particle, high particle distance, it's just really hard to see those nuances that are happening here. So cool. So it does feel like we are starting to get very slight wrinkling here, but hardly, right? So let me bring this back up to 20 so that we can adjust it accordingly. And so that adjustment, it is giving us the look that we want, just very subtle. So what that's letting me know is we can really crank this guy and be as ambitious. Cool. So now we are definitely getting that nice wrinkling, right, that we are seeing up here. So let's really pull this guy out so that it can happen for the back. Cool. And once again, it just looks so low poly that I'm just going to drop it down to 15 and see how it actually looks, right? Cool. So yeah, we're definitely getting these wrinkles here. Awesome. And I would even go as far, sometimes when you sim, the frozen stuff gets intersected, just make sure that you are re-simming that at the end. Always sim these guys separately because again, we want to really separate these two behaviors, right? What tends to happen is if you unfreeze both parts and you sim it, it just starts, do you see how it just really makes this whole line super wonky? That's just the nature of, you know, fabric behavior. The shorter piece of fabric is always going to try to compensate for the larger piece of fabric it's attached to. So to prevent kind of weird warping, you just freeze this and then you have a beautiful, nice, clean seam. Okay, cool. So now that we are getting the details that we like, and it looks like we're going in the right direction. Cool, let's see if we can get this volume. You see how it's kind of giving us a little poof, right? Let's see if we can get that volume just naturally. So what I'm going to do now is I noticed that our wrinkles here, they feel very taut, right? Like this guy doesn't feel like it's tightly pulled. It looks like very loose to the point where it's pulling down here, right? Like they're starting to settle here because of the amount of excess fabric. So if that's the case, we're just going to lower this guy just a little bit. And we're just going to do baby steps, very little at a time. Okay, and let me once again walk this guy down to a lower particle distance so I can see it a little bit better. Let's go down to 10. And I do this all the time. Think of it as ZBrush, where you're walking up and down subdivisions just to see how it actually looks in its greatest potential, right? So that is what I constantly do. I just constantly look, see at a lower particle distance, and I can start seeing that it's naturally wanting to give me that volume that we are getting here. So I don't really necessarily need a collider, which is great. I prefer not to use colliders. I try to just work with what I have. And beautiful. So now this is starting to give us that nice pooling detail that we are starting to see here, right? So it's giving us a lot of great stuff. I do feel like it's a little excessive. You know what? I think it'll do. That'll do, donkey. That'll do. All right, awesome. So now that we have our top part pretty much done, okay. Something that I would avoid is kind of what I noticed with sleeves like this. It tends to give us this weird excessive amount of fabric at the bottom of our arm sleeve here. So what I like to do is I'm going to add a point once again to the middle right here. I'll just put it the middle of the pattern. And I'm just going to pull these guys up ever so slightly. And we're going to just make it a nice U shape so that it's not a harsh diamondy shape. And what that'll allow me to do is kind of give this guy a little bit more of a cinch. Maybe that was too aggressive. Maybe we don't need that severe of a shape. Just so that we get rid of some of that excess. So now I feel like we are hitting the notes, right? Which is this voluminous round sleeve with the ruffles, and then the pooling and gathering of the fabric giving us these nice beautiful wrinkles. Cool. So now that we are done with that, let's address our bottom half here, right? So again, it looks like it's going to be the same behavior, and then it looks like eventually it gets shoved into a very fitted glove. So the glove looks like it's about to hit the elbow, right? So let's make a internal line around that area. Again, hopefully you guys are a little bit more accurate than me. I'm just eyeballing it for the sake of the tutorial. And we're gonna do another cut and sew. Again, we're just gonna try our best to separate this guy out. I'm gonna activate this, deactivate, and let's just work with this guy right here, which I'm just gonna use as a temporary placer for our gloves that will inevitably model, ideally not in MD. So with gloves, I get a lot of questions about, are gloves worth it in MD? My personal opinion is if it's like this, where you hardly see any wrinkle behavior except for at the bottom, then what I highly recommend is you build this guy as like a simple cylinder, like what I'm doing now, and then you build just this guy's fold behavior. But that's honestly, even in my opinion, I feel like it's a little overkill sometimes, just because, again, with fingers, it's a very small area, right? And they're all very kind of, think of these as like armpits, right? So you're just cramming a lot of information onto small pieces of limbs, if you will. And so it just fights a lot, and it does chug because you have multiple small pieces that have to get simmed. So one, I recommend that if you are doing gloves, that you do it in a completely separate file. Luckily, with gloves, they're not necessarily interacting with the rest of the body, so really you can just isolate it, right? Obviously, sometimes it interacts with the sleeve. That's a different discussion. If you have gloves like this, I highly recommend doing it as its own Marvelous Designer file. But yeah, I feel like if you guys are in a time crunch and you're not trying to showcase gloves in MD, then I really do recommend probably just modeling them out and then using maybe alphas if you would like onto getting those nice folds, or even just hand sculpting with great references. Okay, so that's my spiel about gloves. So let's just do a little placer. Luckily in this case, we're just going to use a little collider, and I'm going to strengthen it, Control H, once again, just to keep this guy nice and just stiff. It gives us almost like a neoprene type of fabric, right? And I'm going to make this guy a little bit longer. I feel like it's hitting, so if I were, I feel like the elbow would be around here-ish, right? Oh, you know what? Okay, yeah, I still think just a touch longer. Ugh. There we go. Okay, cool. So now that I have our glove placed here, we're gonna bring back our sleeve here, sim it. Cool. And so let's focus on the top behavior here. So it looks like it's going to have quite a bit of offset. So let's definitely change this length to be longer. So I'm gonna do something like 45. I feel like that's good. And we're gonna change the direction to both so it just evenly elongates. Awesome. So it does look like it's starting to give us that nice ruffled behavior. I'm just walking it down particle distance so I could just see clearly how much of that fold is happening. And I actually do think this amount is pretty good for what we need, right? I feel like these are nice and long. It looks like it's kind of twisting. I think that's due to this guy. So I'm going to actually, ooh, oh, just, ooh, no. We're just going to have it untwist. So I just want these folds to be very long, right? I don't want them to kind of have a weird twist to them. Okay, awesome. So it looks like that's the spot. Okay, and we're gonna deactivate this guy and resim this guy separately just so that, again, we keep the integrity, but we just want the general vicinity of where this glove is. All right. Fabulous. Okay. So yeah, I do feel like the offset is good. Maybe just a touch longer. So let's make it 50 on both sides. Fabulous. Okay, so I feel like we're getting definitely a good amount of wrinkles that I feel like are representing these long wrinkles we have. Awesome. And I'm just going to pull this guy back up to 20 now that we know what it's going to look like at the highest resolution. And again, we have that pooling language that we saw above, right? And it feels like it's definitely way more generous down here, right? It feels definitely like there is some excess. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to line this guy up to the top since there is that excess, right? And then we're gonna start elongating this guy little by little. I'm just gonna ignore this type of intersection just for now. Awesome, awesome. So we definitely are getting that pooling. And now that I look at it, I feel like the length of this is much longer. So I'm gonna go ahead and just pull this guy down, right? Just so that we can get that language to look a little bit more accurate. Let me, okay, this looks silly. Let me sim this guy to be a little bit shorter. Awesome, awesome. And let me just pull this guy down. Okay, now that it's in its general vicinity, I'm just simming it separately. I always try to sim it separately because I want this guy to feel nice and crispy, right? I don't feel like it's... Why is this cutting it very weirdly? Okay. Just double check. I'm not sure why these are cutting like a little offset like that, but just double check that your sewing relationships are always correct and exactly how you guys want it. Alright, so now that that's in its place, this is just so that we can maintain the shape of this, right? We want that dynamic, just very close to the skin, and then this drama right here, right? How the silhouette is just very dynamic. It goes bunched and then very straight down. So we want to respect that language by making sure that this is simmed separately so that it keeps its integrity and not warped to the larger piece of fabric that it's getting attached to. Awesome, cool. So now we are definitely getting the pooling, but I don't feel like it's this kind of excessive look. So let's just keep on going. Fabulous. So now I feel like when I'm shrugging, when I'm pulling this guy down, we are definitely starting to see that excessive kind of bubbling that we're seeing here. And so now if we walk this guy down, and I do it in increments of 5 because sometimes when you go from 20 to like particle distance 5, it, depending on how complex your garment is, it might crash on you. So just to avoid that situation, I always give my MD time to figure out the updates that I've made by going in increments of 5. Okay, cool. So I definitely feel like we are hitting the bigger shapes, right? And I feel like this would be a good starting point to start dialing in some stuff. So like I love the wrinkles that are happening here, but I don't necessarily love this kind of extra stuff we are seeing here, right? I feel like this guy feels a little bit more snug to the body, right? As opposed to ours, which it immediately bellows. Bellows? Bells. Okay. So let me make this a little shorter. So, actually, I'm going to see if I can just pull, because I'm thinking I like the wrinkles here. I just don't like this volume here. So let's see if I could just pull this guy in and kind of fake that look. I don't know. I don't know. I think it might work. I think it might work. Yes. All right, so we're gonna pull this guy in and in. I'm just avoiding the bottom area and kind of making sure that the top area still has some fabric. And yeah, so I feel like this is a much more closer to our concept. Okay, but yeah, this would be how I address a sleeve like this, and I'll just walk it down to a lower particle distance so that we can all really enjoy the amount of detail. Ooh, this is like set dressing where I think this is just as important, if not like the most important, just because think of it at clothing as a mannequin. I've seen this so much in student work where they have a beautiful pattern and everything is working, and I know that it's going to be a really beautiful piece, but they don't take the time at the very end to just dress their clothing to make sure that it's sitting right on the body. What tends to happen is you're working on your file for so long that you don't realize that the pattern is working correct, but it's just not sitting properly. So if you just kind of, like a little move there, it helps kind of make this guy as appealing, as dynamic as you guys wanted it to be, right? So I would feel like that's such a missed opportunity. So definitely, guys, take your time to really art direct, how you want these guys to settle, right? Like, I don't enjoy this curve that's happening, so I'm trying to get rid of it, right? By, like, maybe moving stuff around. Cool. Something like that. And then let's go ahead and address our top area as well. Sorry if you hear my computer. I'm going to space. Cool. And so I feel like we are definitely hitting the character traits of this sleeve. And this is where you guys will start salting to taste, right? This is where you can, get rid of some of this volume here. Maybe it's too excessive, right? And then just zhuzh up. Maybe I have too much fabric here. Okay, but yeah, and then what's great, again, since there is no excessive excessive fabric here, the armband should sit right clean on top, and that's literally the illusion that we're trying to make. All right, so this is my approach to a sleeve like this. Hopefully that was informative, and hopefully you guys were able to understand how to tackle a sleeve that feels like there's a lot of moving parts to it. And yeah, definitely, guys, if you have any questions, maybe if you guys are working on projects and wondering how to address some things, please feel free to reach out. I would love to help troubleshoot. Maybe I can make it a series where I just give feedback through a YouTube tutorial. But yeah, lots of exciting things coming up. I do want to make a lot more content for this channel, and thank you again, Daniel, for allowing me to use your concepts and help you kind of troubleshoot. Again, Daniel was a previous student of mine. I do teach at CGMA. The class is called Cloth Creation and Simulation for Real Time. So in that class, we do go over how to use Marvelous Designer and bring clothing that you make from Marvelous Designer through an entire games pipeline. So if you guys are interested, definitely sign up. Other than that, I hope you guys are having fun making clothing out there. Okay, bye. Bye.